Hi, everyone who's joining us. Welcome to our first installation of Madison, Getting Cheeky with God, with Making Mentions, which is myself and Jesse, and Fucking the Fine Print, which is Mad and Kayla. Yeah, I think let's just jump right in and we can just introduce our respective organizations for the other organization's audience, and then ourselves and what we're going to talk about in our sessions.
Good.
Jesse, do you want to introduce Making Mentions?
Sure, very quickly. Making Mentions is our anti-oppressive Jewish organization where we confront issues within the Jewish community, such as racism, homophobia, transphobia, Zionism, everything that really impacts us as Jews. And we've been fortunate enough to host workshops, and we're also hosting our Not Your Bubbies Torah School series. So go back and watch any of our videos on a bunch of really interesting Jewish topics.
Thanks, Jesse. Matt or Kaylin, want to take us away?
Or do you want to go, Mad? Yeah, so we are Fucking the Fine Print. We essentially have radical pleasure-based conversations about sex. Yeah, I think that it kind of came from a place of not seeing ourselves in like other sex positive spaces. So we like to really put a precedent on discussing like performative sex and like non-goal oriented sex as the starting place for sexual interaction. So yeah.
Yay. So we all know each other outside of our organizations, but found like a lot of overlap between our shared interests and got really excited about talking about like sex and the body and like how that intersects with Judaism and spirituality as a whole. And that is how we came to Getting Cheeky with God as a series. And so today we're going to talk about sex, pleasure, and Judaism really broadly. Our next session is going to be about menstruation and the mikvah. Our third session is going to be on abortion and Judaism, and our final session will be on circumcision. So that's the rest of the series to look forward to. We're really excited if you're watching this now or in the future, or if you want to join us for another session that interests you. Does anyone else have any other introductory contributions? Should we introduce ourselves, like names, pronouns, vibe?
Yeah.
You want to take us off, Kaylin or Matt?
Sure. I am Kaylin. I use she and they pronoun, and I am based in Brooklyn. Yeah. Is there anything else?
What's your sign?
Oh, yeah. I am a Virgo sun, Cancer moon, Scorpio rising.
You love to hear it.
Nice. She, her pronouns. I am a Leo, and I'm based in Washington, D.C.
I'm Jessie. I'm based in Brooklyn. She, her pronouns. And I'm a Pisces sun, Pisces moon, Gemini rising.
A lot going on. My name is Alana. I use she and they pronouns. I live in East Harlem, and I am a Taurus sun, Virgo moon, Leo rising for some spice. So yeah, let's just jump in. I think Madison is going to lead us in a really fun activity if you want to join along in the activity or just watch us engage.
So the activity we're going to be doing today is an activity that I actually got from Afrosexology. They have a solo workbook that is really phenomenal. So the activity is essentially to list the top 5 things in your life that bring you pleasure, laughing, spending time dancing with friends, watching cartoons, masturbating, and then also right next to it, you did it. Does anyone want to go, or are we? Should I go for first?
Yeah, I think you should lead by demonstration.
Yeah, so my first thing that I did most recently was sex on 4/9, and then the second thing is eating turkeys. That was 4/8, so last Friday, and reading a comic 4/8, foreign films. That was maybe a month ago. Then making original tea blends, which was also like a month.
Nice. Jesse, do you want to go next?
I was gonna be like Alana. So I like to go on long walks. That was on the 11th. Going to the movies. That was on the 1st. Seeing my niece and spending time with my niece. That was the 27th of March. Going on dates with my partner. That was on the 1st. And sleeping in, which was today.
Yes.
So yeah, those are my 5.
Okay.
Okay, so I biked, and that was today. I had really good snack of yogurt and blueberries and maple syrup, delicious, which is now my new favorite, and that was yesterday. I walked to get coffee. That was on last Friday, and I finished a book, and that was last Wednesday.
Ooh. What book did you finish?
I have just finished. I literally just forgot the name. Brain fog.
Bless.
But yeah, I'll remember it, and I'll probably end up texting it later.
Okay.
Kaylin, wait, I just finished A Girl is a Body of Water, by the way. Sorry, you read it like a year ago. I know, but anyway. Okay,
We
sorry.
can discuss later.
Yeah.
We love book recommendations. I'm not positive that I did this right, and this is definitely not the top 5 things in my life, but it's 5 things that bring me pleasure, period. So the first is kind of corny, but it makes me really happy to wake up next to my partner in the morning and just get to it. And I got to do that this morning, so that was really nice. And I love going into a physical bookstore and buying a book. I don't know, it just makes me really happy. And I did that last Monday on the 4th. Being in really big groups of all of my loved ones, just having fun and laughing together. And I got to do that last weekend on the 2nd, eating pickles and olives at the same time. And I did get to do that right before we came on this live. So entering the live with lots of joy. And traveling to new places or different cities, and I got to do that this past weekend, the 9th through the 11th. I was in Chicago, Mad. So,
Really?
yeah. It was really fun. I hadn't been since I was 10 years old, so it was cool to go as an adult.
I just remembered the book.
Oh,
It was Stone Butch Blues.
Oh,
which
can I borrow that? Do you have a copy?
I sent you the free PDF link, but I can resend it. I'll resend it.
I do have that. I won't be reading it online, but I appreciate that. No.
So I think too, the most important thing, or what I thought was interesting about mine was things that were on my list that I haven't even done since a month, and that's pretty crazy to me. I don't even necessarily force myself or commit to engaging in things that bring me pleasure regularly, especially if they're things that I feel take a lot of work, but then have a lot of emotional after and stuff like that. And I also think the point of the activity is kind of just to recognize all of the things that bring you pleasure outside of sex or anything like that. Pleasure is really expansive, it's very holistic, and it's really easy to get those things from all parts of our life. I also think the homework is to commit to one of these things every week for the next month.
Which one are y'all going to do every week for the next month?
I'm going to try and bike.
Okay.
Nice.
I have the balcony bike, and I have a real bike, so I'll try that.
I think mine is going to be to watch a porn, but not in a really long time. But
Nice.
yeah.
You love doing that?
I think I'm going to commit to dates with my partner regularly. I think it's harder when you live together because you just get used to hanging out, but be intentional with it.
I love that. That's really funny, Jesse, because I was just talking about that with Carly, and we were on a date, and we were even though we spend so much time together, it's different to have intentional time set aside, but it's just you both interacting with each other and having conversations outside of your house or your normal haunts or whatever. So we were also talking about doing that more consistently. But out of the list that I gave, I think that I will commit to eating pickles and olives once a week for the next month, and I think that that's attainable for me. So everyone who's watching, also do this activity. Write a list of your 5 favorite, like the top 5 things in your life that bring you pleasure, and the date that you did them last, and then your homework is to try to do one of those things every week for the next month, just to bring some more pleasure into your life. Thanks for that activity, Mad.
Of course. I'm glad I could share it.
Yeah, thanks to Afrosexology, the workbook for that.
I'm going to plug them again this conversation. Fan.
Incredible. Yes, pickles and olives. You love to see
So good.
it.
The Tomte pickles are the number one.
I did actually.
I'm definitely in the minority. I don't like pickles. I don't even think.
It's really upsetting to me.
Blasphemous.
It's fine, I guess.
All right.
Someone want to read our definition of pleasure?
I can.
We wanted to ground ourselves in a shared definition of pleasure for the space, because I think, something that we were all talking about is the fact that pleasure can be very broad, and so often when we talk about sex, we're not talking about pleasure. So we just sort of wanted to share like how we are defining pleasure for this space.
Yeah. So I just went on like a sort of dictionary.com type of situation, but you guys can let me know if you agree with it. So pleasure is defined as a feeling of happy satisfaction or enjoyment. And I think that's interesting because like when I think pleasure, I think like sex, kind of like I have a lot of, I don't know, taboo notions about it, but like the definition couldn't be more straightforward. And I think this is what it is.
Yeah. I saw something recently that was like, think of sex like pizza, which was very, very interesting, where it's like you can have it any different way. There's all these different preferences or different ways to do it or think about it. And it's not really, oh, it's a success or a failure. It's just, was it satisfying? And like that being the focus. And I thought that was a very interesting way to think about it. And like very clear to be like, oh, okay.
Because you don't eat pizza. Yeah. I don't eat this and that or something.
Yeah. I feel like something that like we talked about a lot is like when we're thinking about pleasure and how moving around.
I had to let the cat out.
When we're thinking about pleasure and how it relates to sex, I feel like pleasure is driven by an orgasm so frequently during sex. And so when we're thinking about just like pleasure being something that feels good or something that we enjoy, and this idea of like goal oriented sex, like separating pleasure from an orgasm and just pleasure being like enjoyment of the sexual practice that you're engaging in, like whatever it might be. And so yeah, I think that's really important because to transition us into our next part of our conversation, like when we're thinking about pleasure in Judaism specifically, there is actually like a lot in a lot of different Jewish texts about the importance of like pleasure and satisfaction during sex, but it's like a bit unclear as to whether or not they mean that pleasure during sex, and it's very heteronormative, but it's unclear if pleasure during sex within Judaism and like within a marriage, again, it's very heteronormative and sort of traditional, but if pleasure is meaning that like the wife or the woman has an orgasm, or is that like she generally is enjoying herself. And like, yeah, I don't know if there are a lot of different commentaries on which one of those things it is. Jesse, do you want to start with some general background on sex in Judaism?
I was kind of looking into more, which I know we have later, and I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead, but queer sex in Judaism, which is also some of the, as we've talked about before, some of the most quotable parts of the Bible are often misinterpreted. Mm-hmm. And although there is a pretty explicit prohibition against queer sex, it's not very specific. For example, nothing in the Torah about lesbian sex or sex between people with vulvas, because patriarchy, but also, so it's not explicitly said that you can't do it. And then also the idea of like sex, non-goal oriented sex, like I just thought of this, like one of the reasonings behind like sex with penises in a homosexual relationship is that spilling the seed or wasting the seed is considered a sin. But if it's not goal oriented with an orgasm or with, like coming, then what is the sin of homosexuality? Anyway, was thinking about that. But kind of, so yeah, there's that kind of background, which is when literally interpreted as a kind of anti-gay or an anti or very sexually conservative, I will just say, kind of interpretation of sex in the Bible. But what we do have when we get into like Talmud and Midrash, and specifically the rabbinic period, is we have more of an exploration of what is a mitzvah and what is a good deed within Judaism. That's a mitzvah literally translates to a commandment, something we're commanded to do. And so we get commandments of all sorts of kinds during the rabbinic period, which include pleasure, finding pleasure in your life, whether it is recognizing the beauty of nature, going outside and enjoying yourself, or having sexual pleasure. So there's like a wide range that becomes really important during the rabbinic period. And since then, there's been many ways to interpret pleasure, which is what you were talking about, Alana, with this ona, or the mitzvot ana, which is pleasuring your wife in the most heterosexual sense. And yeah, I think I also wanted to really quickly just point to the book of Ruth, because I love the story of Ruth and Naomi as an example of like finding joy and compassion and pleasure. And it's like subtly undertoned that maybe it was also a lesbian relationship, but I think that's also like another nod to the Torah being like, this brings me pleasure. We're not going to say which kind, you know, you figure it out. Like there's these kind of highly interpretable moments that we should expand upon when we're talking about Judaism, not in the very narrow conservative sense.
Very, and they were roommates kind of vibe.
Yes. Oh my God, Kaylin, can you make a meme of that? Ruth and Naomi. And
Oh
they were
yeah,
roommates.
100%. Okay. I'm on
That's
it.
an aside, but that is really good stuff. Yeah, thanks, Jesse. So I feel like I shockingly focused more on like the heteronormative side of things. Yeah, a little role reversal there. I was like looking very specific, like I wanted to really understand like what the texts actually say that sort of indicate that sex is talked about differently within Judaism, because that's mentioned a lot, and there's a lot of like mainstream commentary about how like Judaism is more sex positive. And so I'm just going to give the caveat now that everything that I'm about to say is in the context of like heteronormative relationships and like traditional heterosexual relationships, so like marriages. So this is all about a man and a woman getting married and what happens after. So again, like you're married, you're not having, I mean, I guess I don't know if they talk about sex before marriage. That's not really discussed as much, but they use the word marriage a lot. So like one of the first commandments and like the first part of the Torah, Genesis, like the first mitzvah that they give, again, mitzvah is commandment, is like this commandment to procreate. But the way that the rabbis have always understood this is that this commandment is only binding on men, and women are exempt from this commandment because they might be put in physical danger by childbirth, which is actually really interesting and probably something more for our session on abortion. But just this idea that like this commandment of procreation was actually only placed on men. And I feel like that's something in society writ large, like men often have the least responsibility for like birth and pregnancy and procreation. So that was really fascinating. And then Jesse sort of touched on this earlier, but this commandment of Onah is this commandment that basically like obligates that a man provides, quote, pleasurable sexual intercourse to his wife on a regular basis if she desires it, even if they already have had children or are incapable of having children, which is also like kind of a big deal. So again, it's not like you need to do this to procreate. It's like, A, it has to be pleasurable and like regular, and like the caveat of if she desires it. So moving us away from like men just getting off, and it not just being for the purpose of childbearing, because it's not like, even if they already have children, even if they can't have children. And I thought that was really fascinating because I don't know what the Bible says, so I can't speak to that. But just to have that laid out in religious text and interpreted as such by rabbis is, I don't know, feels pretty radical for the straights, at least, for sure. And there's another element that talks about how if the husband refuses to perform his marital obligation, like what we just talked about, onah, in a loving, romantic, sexually pleasing way, the wife actually has a right to demand a divorce and receive her ketubah settlement, or which is just like money from the marriage, which again is also pretty nuts because like typically like men are the ones historically, especially within the olden days, who could ask for divorces or initiate divorces. And so the fact that women were able to demand a divorce if their husband was not like providing them with pleasure during sex is like pretty, I don't know, that's pretty wild. I mean, even now, I feel like if you, like, people would have a lot of things to say if that was someone's reasoning for divorce. So for that to be like written or implied in ancient Jewish texts is pretty radical. And I just wanted to end on the fact that another thing that really stood out to me was they were talking about any sexual union without the abundance of passion, love, and will is without the divine presence. And I just thought that was really beautiful, like the idea that like the divine presence, whatever you think that may be, God, the universe, some whatever it is for you, like exists when we're engaging in like pleasurable acts with each other, and when we're engaging in pleasure, like it is this presence of the divine. And on top of that, like it should be part of our sex lives, and that means that like sex should be passionate and loving and like pleasurable, whatever that may mean. There's never a mention of a goal there, an orgasm, but just like that it should be full of those things. So I don't know, I thought that that was pretty beautiful, and I feel like that can end our Judaism and pleasure spiel, unless Mad and
I
Kayla want to have that.
I had a yeah.
You go, Mad. You go, Mad.
I was gonna say, at least from a Catholic perspective, I always thought that was really radical. I definitely, and I didn't read the Bible back front, but I don't think that. And I remember I took a human sexuality class, and that was something that's done as like unique aspect to religion that not a lot of religions have part of like their scripture to write in pleasure, like center the pleasure of their wife and things like that. I guess my question would be, do you feel that people live out those the scripture, like what was written, and do you think it comes into practice relationships in modern day too?
I mean, everyone else feel free to answer this. I'm gonna say no, and I just think that's because it's gonna be a hot take. I think that people like to claim to be religious when it benefits them and then not actually take the time to read what the religious texts that they're so passionate about are saying. And so this definitely isn't one of those things that people are like pulling from the Torah and being like, I am a religious and observant Jew because I focus on pleasure during sex, because that is like taboo within our Western society. Um, do I think it's cool, and am I going to ground that in like Jewish practice? Definitely. But I don't think that like mainstream like Jewish Americans or like Jews in general, especially like more observant Jews, are like holding this near and dear. It's actually, this is sort of an aside, and Jesse and Kaylin and Matt, I'm curious what you have to say about this, but I remember growing up, I heard a lot about how like more religious sects of Judaism had sex through a cloth and weren't really allowed to touch each other. Kaylin and Jesse and I grew up very close to an ultra Orthodox community, and that's what like all the kids in school would talk about when they were talking about the community we lived near. And so to like then years later actually read what the Torah says about sex and pleasure and have it be so different from that, I'm just curious like where y'all think that came from, or like what that even was about, if that's grounded in, if that was grounded in something actual, or if that was just like anti-Semitism.
I think
So it is a myth.
yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, my cat is scratching.
I hear her.
But basically, I actually came across that doing like looking into this, and when we get like later on into like further discussion stuff, but part of me wonders too if it's like this idea of, oh, you're already so observant and like covering up so much, and you're supposed to cover everything. They're so like conservative that even during sex they can't be naked. But yeah, I feel like it's very interesting to still see that. And now it's funny because when I came across it, it like brought that memory back of, oh, this is what was said growing up.
Yeah.
And the last time I had seen it, I think it was in relation to like Catholic people, or it was in The Handmaid's Tale. Sorry.
Yes, classic.
But I was like, oh my God, I completely forgot I associated this with growing up and hearing it about living near an ultra-Orthodox community.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a pretty good transition, unless we want to stick with the Judaism specific, but like moving to like religion and sex in general, like I think that's a really good example of just how the more religious people are, the more like sexually, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, like negative, I guess.
Repressed.
Yeah. Yeah, repressed, like society assumes people to be and like assumes of the sex lives of more religious folks. And I think like we see that in shows like The Handmaid's Tale, where I guess they never say it's Christianity, but like religion has such like a heavy hand, and just in general it's so repressed. So but we don't actually know what's going on in people's sex lives, I guess is.
Yeah, I think for me, what's interesting about that too is I think religion, I mean, like especially now that we're talking about like pleasure in Judaism, like it can be a means of enhancing your sexual relationship with your partner. By no means repressive. To me, it's like you were saying, maybe more patriarchy across your relationship rather than its inherent power.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Mad, with the like this idea that somehow they're inextricably linked, that like when people got more religious, therefore there was this like father figure that you weren't supposed to piss off by having sex with people. And I think it way more stems from like our American like puritanical values that like we're taught in schools and we're taught all throughout society, that then informs the institutions. Like, not to bring us back a little bit, but like the Orthodox movement used to be like radical. Like they were like transformed. I mean, they're talking about the universe expanding and then shrinking and the shards of it exploding all over the earth. It's like incredible stuff. But because of like the way it got sanitized and packaged into like this European mindset, and then also, you know, coming to America's, it conformed to fit this social expectation of what like morals and ethics we're supposed to be teaching children, which is very like eugenics based, very puritanical in the sense of what schools were designed to do. So not to get us into schools because that's not where I'm trying to go, but the idea that, yeah, like I agree, I don't think religion inherently makes you repressed. I think it has functioned in that way to reinforce the same values that like school is trying to reinforce.
There's a really good book that I read for my capstone, and it's called Love the Sin. There's a subtext, like semicolon something, but it's by Anne Pellegrino. No, and Janet R. Jacobson. And it talks about how like Christianity is so intertwined with how we view, and like those morals are like how we do view like sex as a culture, and like why we think of it as so sinful, and like why we're so ashamed of it and can't talk about it. And it's really interesting how it's like we just pretend though that it's like not, but it's also like how we pretend nation and state are separated. But I mean, church and state, that's the thing. But yeah, it's a really interesting take on it. So
awesome. I'm gonna read that.
I just want to like note again as like a caveat, I feel like there's so much that we could talk about when it comes to these topics. So like we're really narrowing our scope in a bit and just touching on some specific things, but like would love to hear anyone's thoughts on the many, many topics that we do not have the time to touch on. Or I don't know, maybe we'll do another session at some point in the future on similar topics. Yeah, religion. And
I found a lot of really cool stuff on this about kinks, if we can go into that. So actually, Alana, don't make fun of me, but there was a BuzzFeed interview.
what's with the BuzzFeed?
I don't do it anymore, but it was
I'm not here to yuck your yum.
It was looking at dominatrixes and their clients who are Hasidim in Brooklyn specifically.
Ooh.
And there were a couple big takeaways from that point, and I looked at a couple other things with this. One big thing I learned from this was there's this brand of a genre of erotica called From Erotica, which is Orthodox erotica, and it basically creates these erotic stories and literature that is still considered like kosher. Like it still is in the confines of, what is kosher. But in this article, it interviewed some of the clients and some of the dominatrices, and some of them were Reform, who were the dominatrix was a Reform Jew. And basically just looking a lot at how there's this idea that a lot of the times clients will bring religious items or ideas to the forefront of their sessions, and they'll do things like wrapping tefillin in that, which are like prayer boxes, or like one of the dominatrix, she made like her client cook bacon for her. And so basically taking these things that are seen either as like sacrilegious or just religious items and allowing the person or the client to like take power over this and kind of use this is either a reclamation, which we've seen, and there's all these ideas too of BDSM as like a reclamation for trauma or for power or whatever, but like a reclamation of your relationship with your religion. And
Very
basically they talked a lot about it in Christianity and Catholic clients too. And basically there was a really interesting part of the article or interview when I was talking about, I see a lot of links between being a sex worker and being a Hasidim, in like we're both ostracized and part of ostracized communities, which was really interesting to see that throughout the article, and talking about how it allowed her to kind of like understand where her clients were coming from with it, and looking at like potential links between how Judaism shows up in kinks, like blindfolding and closing your eyes for prayer. Was one of the instances. So it was super interesting to stumble upon this huge interview and then this large amount of erotica that...
Yeah, I just did a quick Google search when you said that, and I was like, what is happening?
There's a lot out there.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It is. I was like, whoa. Also, what you said about like kinks and their connection to Judaism, when you talked about blindfolding, I'm thinking about like wrapping tefillin, and I've seen this before talked about like wrapping tefillin, but thinking about how that connects to binding or using rope or using leather to bind yourself, and like the connection to like tefillin, which is used for like prayer, which is also a really interesting connection.
Yeah, or like even queering. I'm imagining if you're not just a cis man using tefillin, like using that as a way to queer Judaism too. It feels like a really cool...
Yeah.
I like that you talked like the idea of recognition, because I think like when I think about religious or acting out your religious kinks, I think about it you like getting on the kind of, I think for me and being in like growing up in a Catholic school and stuff like that, like certain things that turn me on definitely are related to like that. So I never thought about it how that could be positive and like reclaiming those things.
Yeah, they love a reclamation. I know we wanted to talk about abstinence and like celibacy and how that is related to religion, and then also pleasure. Do you want to kick us off with that, Mad?
Yeah, I thought it would be cool to talk about it because I think that it was really beneficial to me in certain parts of my life. Was like I didn't feel like partner sex with me, or like I was trying to like heal from trauma and things like that. And I think that I gained so much pleasure from those without having to have partners. And yeah, so that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it. And then there's just so many you can bring in during during that I could also list. Yeah, I just think that celibacy is time to like become more aware, feel safe and secure and things like that. Yeah.
Thanks, Mad. I just want to highlight, I think you might be breaking up a little bit if you want to switch off of your
Me?
Wi-Fi. Yeah, I noticed it earlier, but I was like, maybe it's just me. I won't say anything. But then I was like, I want everyone to hear what you're saying, and now it's so late. We're just troubleshooting.
Off. So maybe, is it still breaking up?
Not really.
Oh, yeah, not really.
Oh, let's still breaking up for you, Alana?
Say something again, Matt.
Yeah. Is it
Okay? I'm gonna keep a. I think it might be better. Sorry, that was an aside. We can troubleshoot that.
I hope it's better. My Wi-Fi is off, but maybe I don't know.
Oh, okay. Now there's just a lag, but I can hear your voice a lot clearer.
Okay.
And I'm
wondering if I should also put in AirPods or something.
Oh, your voice is so much clearer now. It's 10 times better.
Okay. Yeah. Did you guys hear what I said, or?
Yeah, I got what you said. I just wanted to make sure it was clear as possible moving forward. Thinking about what you said, I want to highlight for like folks, like what really stands out to me about that is just I feel like abstinence and celibacy are so often talked about in terms of like really religious concepts or like negative things, or that, you know, you have to be abstinent or you have to be celibate like in a religious context before marriage, or because sex is a sin, or like lack of sex education leading to like abstinence only like birth preventative pregnancy prevention like methods. But like thinking about abstinence and celibacy as like pleasurable and like spaces where like we might not be having partnered sex but can be experiencing joy, I think is like a really radical standpoint, and in like connection to when we're talking about reclamation, I think can be a reclamation of some of those like potentially harmful like religious commandments or like models.
Yeah, and I think to that too, like when you're engaging in celibacy, like you're very much focusing on what feels good to you. I think it's a lot less of responding to what feels good to other people. So like it's a moment to be very authentic and intentional and become reaware of like things that are lost when you engage in like, I don't know, partnered sex that's not healthy.
Yeah. Yeah, something that came up like when we were having conversations around this in the first place was just that this idea that like sex positivity is about making sexual decisions that feel good for yourself. So that doesn't have to mean that you're having sex. It doesn't have to mean, oh, everyone should be having sex and it's awesome. Or even if you're like engaging in abstinence or celibacy, like you don't even have to be having sex with yourself or like masturbating, but just like making sexual decisions that feel good, and like working through sexual trauma that you might hold, or like engaging in, you know, your own connection to yourself to enhance like future sexual experiences and make them more pleasurable. And yeah, I don't know, I thought that was really really radical and really cool, and I definitely credit you, Mad, for making me aware of a lot of that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I also, to that point of not even having to like masturbate or do anything, like a lot of the things that I did during that time had nothing to do with like sex. Mindfulness, body scans are a big one. Pelvic floor exercises are a big one. Kaylin gave us.
I love some pelvic floor therapy. I'm all for the pelvic floor therapy. More people need to do it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And yoni steams are one. I don't know. I've never done one. I know that they're like really healing and things like that, but I've also heard that maybe you shouldn't do them unless something is like not wrong, but if there's some sort of like, I don't know, if you have a yeast infection or something like that. But yeah, so those are like big ones that I think are really great. And the Afrosexology solo sex workbook had just like tons of like journaling exercises that were just help me understand my sexual shame or like my sexual routines that like were serving someone else. And I think that, yeah, it just kind of made me more confident in myself. I think that too before, well, when we started doing this, like me and Kaylin, the fucking the fine print, it was because like I felt like I didn't, the word, I felt like not good about myself sexually and things like that. And I think that those were opportunities to be like, so much of what's going on in my head is like not a reality. And yeah, breaking those, unhealthy routines.
Yeah, I think that's important for people who like want to focus on pleasure during sex and move away from these ideas that like successful sex or like goal-oriented sex that we're going to talk about, and it has to mean like having an orgasm during sex, and like the fact that sex can be valid even if it's not partnered, and like just the ways that we talk about sex, and just taking that time for yourself to really reframe those narratives so that sex that you have in the future, if you choose to, like is actually centered around pleasure and is something that makes you like feel good and hopefully take some shame away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk about non-goal oriented sex and close ourselves out a little bit? I feel like we have been touching on non-goal oriented sex this whole time, but
I had a definition too for it if we wanted to read that. So non-goal oriented sex is sex where we're not equating an orgasm with the end all be all of a successful positive experience. So it very much makes sex about the process more than the end result. And me and Kaylin talk about this all the time. I think it's just about the experience. It helps you enjoy the experience without thinking about, am I going to come or am I going to make them come? It's just not, it's not helpful. I think that it is really distracting and it didn't lead me to good sex. So,
yeah.
And I had exercises, but if other people want to comment on non-goal oriented sex too.
I just think like it's such a deviation from the way that we think about sex, like as a society. I don't know, something that I definitely need to work on unpacking within myself is like I'm someone who like I feel like I'm fairly sex positive, like sex friendly, and like I'm all for like people making sexual decisions that feel good for themselves. And like I think I can sit and be like, it's totally fine if someone doesn't orgasm during sex. That's not the point. But like in my actual practice, I definitely have felt myself like feel differently about that and be like, you know, if I'm like having sex with my partner and I can't orgasm or like they don't orgasm, like feeling like that's a failing or like I did something wrong and having to be honest with myself about moving outside of that mindset. And if that's hard for me and like us as people who are really entrenched in this work and thinking about this a lot, yeah, I just want to acknowledge like it's like easy for us to say we should be pursuing non-goal oriented sex, but it's like something that we really have to practice all the time, and we're constantly like engaging with how it actually makes us feel.
Yeah. I definitely think that it's so hard to put into practice rather than have a concept of it in your head because like I don't know. I mean, I do it all the time even still, and it's definitely like a constant effort to remember that that's not what is important.
I know Matt and Kaylin, you guys talk about this all the time with like pop culture, but the representation of non-goal oriented sex is like none for me personally in my life. I have never seen a positive interpretation on television or movies of someone not coming during sex and it being okay. It's always mad or
Never thought about
what you do wrong, you know? So it's like, of course we would think it's failure when all we've seen is like, if you don't do what the other person wants and make them happy, you did a bad job and therefore you'll be ridiculed in like a comedy special or like on a TV show, and that's what you get.
I mean, I've even run into, as someone who it's very hard to orgasm, either solo or with partnered sex, like I've straight up just at the beginning of before sex occurs, I've had conversations where it's just, look, I don't orgasm easily. I will let you know if I'm having a good time or not. It doesn't mean I'm not enjoying it. And even still, it's like, that's a hard thing for like both myself still who just said that and like the partner or like to be like okay with, because we're just like taught so much that like sex is only, it's either good or bad. Like you pass it, like you pass it, you fail.
Yeah. And I think too, like that's why we started the thing, because like I never understood why the sex that I was having didn't feel like the sex that was on TV. Like it felt like even at 22 I was like, is there something wrong with me? Like it was just so weird to me that like I didn't know, like I didn't ever see a realistic depiction of sex, or I didn't feel like I hear about it. Like I felt like it was always about orgasming or like the craziest experiences and things like that, and it just makes you feel like failing all the time. Yeah. To that, I think that the great thing that I've tried to take out of non-goal oriented sex is it's not a concept. There's things that we can do to like help to reinforce it, beginning with a partner, to try and stop making noises that you wouldn't make naturally. I saw on like this one show on Netflix, Goop. Also, can you guys hear me now? Does it sound good?
Yeah,
It's perfect
Okay.
now.
Okay. And apparently like the moaning noise that we hear in like porn, like the breathing heavy, like that actually like is putting your body in like fight or flight. What's important is taking deep breaths rather than those short, like tight ones. That's actually not relaxing you at all. So that's a big one. The next one is breathing or syncing breathing with your partner, eye gazing or body gazing, focusing on a certain area on your or your partner's body, like their collarbones or hands that look particularly sexy, and trying to cut out penetrative sex and prioritize things that are considered foreplay. And exercises for casual sex, which I think are really important because we can have non-goal oriented sex in casual sexual relationships as well. And I think that this one's really good for getting to know any sexual partner, and it's to lay next to someone and have them go through and feel your body, and then you do the same and explore your senses and close your eyes, deep breathe, taking note of the things that feel good, and then discussing after. So a lot of them are kind of just, well, that one's just for the partnered sex, but a lot of those are very much like focusing yourself, like bringing yourself into the room, like being in your body kind of, which I also think is a whole other thing if you're also dealing with sexual trauma and things like that, and you are like disassociating, which is things that I used to do as like a safety mechanism. But like kind of bringing yourself back to center and like getting out of your head is kind of just a big part of it. On your own, I think it's really important to plug sex therapy. It can definitely help people who are struggling to go of negative or distracting thoughts during sex. Also, body engaging, and it's this like movement meditation. It's called like Kundalini meditation. I think that it helps me always feel more comfortable in my body and then practice moving it in ways that I enjoy. One that me and Kaylin talk about a lot is also like accessorizing your sex life, buying some nice lingerie or like sex toys or like satin sheets, like really doing it big for yourself. So those are some actionable things to try and help to reaffirm, non-goal oriented sex.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think that's really helpful, and we're gonna post this for folks later, so you don't have to like remember this all. I have some beautiful little graphics from Matt talking about all these activities and some of our takeaways. I think like final thing that I was thinking about while you were talking is just that so much of like goal-oriented sex is really like heteronormative in a lot of ways. And I feel like even though I still find myself caught up in goal-oriented sex outside of like penetrative or heteronormative sex, like it did allow me to reframe so much of my thinking. And even the way that like I think one of the suggestions was like engage in activities that would be considered foreplay.
Yeah, I heard, and I was like,
Yeah,
I saw you catch it like as soon as you said it. And I was just like thinking about the way that we like define things, and like even catching myself or other people be like, oh, but did you have sex? And being like, what does that mean? Like, you know, like, what do you mean when you say, but did you have sex with this person? And it's always about, well, did you have penetrative sex with this person? And I feel like I really had to break that down for myself when I really started engaging in like non-straight sexual relationships. And so it's interesting to apply like a queer lens to moving away from goal-oriented sex or even like heteronormative definitions of sex and pleasure.
I want to also just add really quickly a lens of internalized fat phobia as well, and like having sex as a larger bodied person and just thinking about all the things that come with it. That could be its own whole section of this. But yeah, just thinking like mindfulness of our bodies and the way our partners or even our like not partner in a romantic sense, but just like sexual partners are feeling about their bodies in the moment might have something to do with sexual trauma, and it might just have something to do with navigating the world as a bigger bodied person as well. Sorry, rushing at the end.
My favorite like thing I've ever been told about non-goal oriented sex, it was for solo exploration. It was someone was like, just set a timer for however long you want, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and just explore, see what feels good. Don't have an end result. If you orgasm, great. If not, but once that timer's over, like, stop. You could just sit there and think. Or you could touch yourself. And it was just like the specific like setting time for yourself of just like figuring it out and being like, oh, I'm just setting aside some time. It's fine. That was very liberatory for me as someone that was like so stressed all the time about forcing myself to try an orgasm or try and have a goal in sex.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks everyone who joined us for our first session of Getting Cheeky with God. Of course, there's, like we said, there's so much that like we could have touched on within this topic that we just simply do not have the time for, but would love to hear y'all's thoughts, and we're going to share some takeaways and activities after this session, like tomorrow, I think,
Yeah.
or later this week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.